At my own baby shower, surrounded by pastel balloons, smiling relatives, and slices of cake, my sister-in-law raised her glass and said, "Let's hope the baby doesn't look like her mom." The room laughed. I didn't. I felt my cheeks flush, but I kept a soft smile plastered on my face like I had done 100 times before. It was easier to swallow the sting than to make a scene. I looked at Marcus, my husband, hoping he might say something. He didn't, just looked down at his plate, eyes tight. Across the table, my 10-year-old son, Caleb, stopped mid-bite and stared at me. He didn't laugh. His eyes flicked from my face to Brielle's smirk, then to the rest of the guests chuckling like they hadn't just watched someone throw a dart at my heart. My mother-in-law, Patricia, even let out one of her sharp little laughs and muttered, "She always did have a strong chin." A few people chuckled harder. No one asked how I felt. No one noticed I'd stopped eating. They all just kept passing plates and pouring lemonade like nothing had happened. I stayed quiet. I always did. I had learned to pick my battles in this family, and besides, I was too tired to fight. 8 months pregnant, feet swollen, back aching. I had hoped today would be about the baby, about joy. But even today, somehow, I had become the punchline. What I didn't know was that Caleb had been watching all of it, listening, remembering. He didn't speak right away. He didn't defend me in that moment. He just sat there, quiet, holding something in his lap, something he'd brought with him wrapped in silver paper and sealed with crooked tape. A gift. A few minutes passed. Brielle moved on to her next joke. People returned to their conversations. The room buzzed again. Then Caleb stood up. No one noticed at first. He wasn't loud. He didn't clear his throat or ask for attention. He just stood, holding his little silver box. And then, in a voice so calm and clear it silenced the laughter, he said, "I made a gift for the baby. Dad said to wait until everyone was watching." The room turned. Forks paused midair. Brielle blinked. My mother-in-law looked up from her cup. Caleb walked around the table and handed the box to Patricia. "Open it now, please," he said. "It's important." She looked confused, but unwrapped it anyway. I didn't know what was inside. Caleb hadn't shown me. He said it was a surprise, but the moment she pulled the lid off and looked inside, her face changed. Her mouth parted. Her hand froze midair. The box sat open in her lap, but she didn't say a word. Nobody did. In that moment, I realized something. For the first time, it wasn't me who had to speak up. It was my son. And what he gave her in that box changed everything. It was supposed to be a celebration. A late Saturday afternoon in April. The sun was warm, but not overwhelming. The kind of day you pray for when you plan an outdoor party. Our backyard had been transformed into something beautiful. Lavender and cream decorations, folding chairs draped in soft fabric, a long buffet table covered with snacks and pastel-colored desserts. A friend of mine had brought a giant teddy bear and set it beside the gift table. The banner over the patio read, "Welcome, baby girl." I had been nervous about the shower, not because I didn't want to celebrate the baby, but because of who would be there. Marcus's family was complicated, especially his mother, Patricia, and his sister-in-law, Brielle. Marcus had tried to reassure me that they would behave. "It's about the baby. Let's just enjoy it," he said as he zipped up the back of my maternity dress earlier that day. I remember forcing a smile, trying to believe him. I had married Marcus 11 years ago. We met when I was 23. I already had Caleb, who was 2 at the time. I never expected to find someone like Marcus. Patient, steady, and ready to love a child that wasn't his. But from the beginning, his family had kept their distance. Patricia was polite in front of Marcus, but cold in private. She never said it outright, but I always felt like she thought I had baggage, like I wasn't the woman she would have chosen for her only son. Still, we built a life. Marcus worked as a structural engineer. I taught art at the local elementary school. We had a quiet rhythm. Caleb thrived. And then, after years of thinking we couldn't have another child, I got pregnant last summer. The surprise had filled our house with laughter. Even Marcus cried when I showed him the test. When Patricia found out, her response was, "Well, it's not like you're young, but I suppose miracles happen." That had been her version of congratulations. As guests began arriving that day, I stayed close to the patio door, welcoming them with small hugs, smiling even when it felt strained. Brielle arrived with a dramatic wave and 3 shopping bags from an upscale baby boutique. She wore sunglasses even though we were under a canopy. I brought options, she said, as if the whole event needed her approval. She kissed Patricia on the cheek and gave Marcus a loud, showy hug. Then she turned to me, nodded once, and said, "You look healthy." That was Brielle's thing. Compliments with a twist of lemon juice. She had married my younger brother, Daniel, 6 years ago. They were complete opposites. He was quiet, grounded. She was sharp, flashy, and never missed a chance to make herself the center of the room. For years, I'd tried to keep things cordial. Holidays, birthdays, even brunches. I told myself she wasn't worth the energy, that ignoring her was stronger than engaging her. But being around Patricia and Brielle together was like stepping into someone else's house and being reminded every minute that you didn't quite belong. Marcus saw it. He always did. But he had a way of smoothing things over with just enough calm to stop me from saying what I really felt. That day, Caleb stuck by my side for most of the afternoon. He could tell I was tense, even if I didn't say anything. He helped carry out napkins and refill ice. At one point, he whispered, "Can we leave early if it gets weird?" I nodded and gave his hand a little squeeze. Then came the games. A diaper relay race. A guessing game for how big my belly was. I tried to enjoy it. Laughed when I was supposed to. Clapped when someone won a prize. But I was watching the room more than I was enjoying it. When it came time to open gifts, everyone gathered around the table. I unwrapped onesies and baby lotion and a beautiful handmade blanket from my aunt. That's when Brielle stood up and made her comment, the one that hit like a slap. "Let's hope the baby doesn't look like her mom." The moment froze. Then came the laughter. And that was when everything started to shift. That was when I felt something inside me go still. I had spent years being quiet for the sake of peace, but Caleb was watching me. And that day, something was different. Not just in me, but in him. And what he did next would make sure no one forgot it. I didn't say anything. After Brielle's comment, after the laughter, I sat perfectly still, holding a pair of tiny baby socks in my lap. My fingers twisted the soft cotton, pretending to smooth them, pretending not to care. Every cell in my body told me to react, to speak up, to defend myself. But I didn't. Not in that moment. Marcus leaned forward and whispered, "Are you okay?" under his breath. I nodded once without looking at him. I could feel Patricia watching me, not with concern, just to see if I'd react. The group moved on like nothing had happened. Someone asked where the cake was from. Another person joked about how baby showers were just an excuse for mimosas. Brielle grinned at her phone, probably texting someone about her own joke. She was proud of it. I knew that smile. But I couldn't shake it off. I wasn't hurt because it was cruel. I was hurt because it wasn't new. This wasn't the first time Brielle had said something like that. It wasn't the first time the room had decided her sarcasm was acceptable. It had become tradition. I was the one who was too sensitive if I pushed back, the one who made it awkward if I didn't laugh along. I looked across the table at Caleb. He hadn't touched his cupcake. He was sitting up very straight, his little hands folded in his lap like he was trying not to fidget. His eyes were locked on me. There was no confusion in them, just a quiet seriousness. He had understood exactly what had happened, and he was waiting to see what I would do about it. Caleb had always been like that. Even as a toddler, he'd read rooms better than most adults. When I used to come home from working double shifts, he would pull his blanket into the kitchen and sit on the floor beside me while I cooked, just so I wouldn't be alone. When kids at school teased him for not having a real dad, he told me it didn't bother him because he already had the best mom in the world. He had a way of seeing the truth without needing it spelled out, and that day, he saw it all. After a few more gifts were opened, Patricia clapped her hands and said, "Let's have Caleb give his gift now." She looked at him like it was a favor, like she was giving him his little moment. He hesitated. I could tell he wasn't sure if it was time. "Go ahead," Marcus said gently. Caleb stood up. He didn't rush. He held the silver wrap box in both hands and walked over to Patricia. She reached for it, but he didn't let go right away. "I want to say something first," he said. The chatter in the yard died down. He wasn't loud, but the room quieted anyway. Maybe it was the tone of his voice. Maybe it was how steady he looked. Caleb turned and looked at me, then back to the group. I made this for the baby. I worked on it for 3 weeks. Dad said I could give it when everyone was watching." A few people smiled politely. Brielle rolled her eyes like she expected it to be cute, like it was just another silly drawing or poem. Caleb looked directly at her. Then he looked at Patricia. "I know some people don't like my mom," he said, clear and even, "and I don't really get why, but I do know that the baby is really lucky because she gets to have the same mom I do." My heart caught in my throat. Someone at the back coughed. No one else made a sound. Then Caleb handed the box to Patricia and walked back to his seat. She opened it slowly, like she didn't expect anything important. She pulled the lid off the box and looked inside. Whatever she saw made her stop. Her fingers touched the edge of something inside, but she didn't pull it out right away. She just stared. The room was still. I felt the silence in my chest like a weight. For the first time in years, no one had anything to say. And for once, I didn't feel alone. Caleb sat back down beside me without saying another word. He didn't look nervous or uncertain. He wasn't seeking applause or validation. He had done what he came to do, and now he was quiet again. But the energy in the backyard had shifted. The laughter, the chatter, even the soft music from the speaker felt like background noise to something bigger. All eyes were still on Patricia. She hadn't moved. She held the open box in her lap, but she hadn't taken anything out. Her expression was difficult to read, somewhere between confusion and discomfort, maybe even shame. I turned slightly to see what Caleb had made. Inside the box was a handmade baby book tied together with pink ribbon and decorated with stickers. He had titled it, "For My Baby Sister from Your Big Brother." The handwriting was uneven but careful. It was full of love. I didn't know he had been working on something like that. He hadn't mentioned it to me or Marcus. I hadn't seen him gather the supplies, but he must have done it late at night, maybe while I was resting. He had been quiet the last few weeks, thoughtful. I had assumed he was nervous about the baby. I hadn't realized he was preparing for something more than her arrival. Patricia finally touched the edge of the book and lifted it out of the box. She opened the first page. I didn't know what she was reading at that moment, but I could see her jaw tighten and her lips pressed together. She turned another page, then another, slower this time. Brielle leaned over from her seat to sneak a look. She let out a short laugh through her nose. "It's cute," she said, almost dismissively. Patricia didn't respond. Marcus shifted beside me. "Did you know he was working on this?" he asked. I shook my head. "Not a clue." He looked at Caleb, who was now sipping juice from a paper cup and watching the adults like a scientist observing a room full of unpredictable animals. He wasn't smiling, but he looked calm, grounded. Patricia turned to the back of the book and stopped. She didn't flip the final page. She stared at it for a long time. "What is it?" someone asked softly from the table. She didn't answer, but I knew. I had a guess before I even saw it. That last page held a photo Caleb had once found tucked inside my jewelry box. It was old, over a decade. I was sitting in a hospital bed, holding newborn Caleb against my chest. No one else was in the room. No flowers, no family, just me and my son. The photo had been taken by a nurse who saw me crying and offered to capture the moment. It was blurry, dim, and raw. I had never shown it to Marcus. It felt like a memory I didn't want to bring into this chapter of my life. But somehow, Caleb had known it mattered, and he had chosen to include it. Below the photo, he had written in crayon, "She did it by herself before. Now we can help her." The weight of that line hit me harder than anything else that day. Caleb wasn't just defending me. He was reminding them of who I was before any of them entered my life, before Patricia's judgment, before Brielle's jokes, before I had to prove myself as a wife, a mother, or a person worth respecting. I saw Patricia blink hard. She closed the book slowly, then looked across the table at Caleb. He met her eyes, not with defiance, but with something firmer, truth. She looked at me next. For once there was no condescension in her face, no silent critique, only stillness. "I didn't know," she said quietly. Marcus reached over and took my hand. His thumb brushed over mine once, not saying anything out loud, but his grip tightened. It was his way of saying he saw it now too. All of it. What had started as a small, dismissive joke from Brielle had turned into something else entirely. My 10-year-old had turned the entire room into a mirror, and for the first time, they had to look at what they had chosen to ignore. That was the moment the energy shifted from uncomfortable silence to quiet reckoning. That was when I knew I didn't have to stay small anymore. The baby book sat closed in Patricia's lap, but the air around it still felt electric. The room wasn't just quiet, it was locked in place. Nobody moved, nobody joked, nobody reached for another slice of cake. I watched Patricia closely. This woman had spent years deciding how much of me she would accept. She had made that choice again and again with every side comment, every raised eyebrow, every moment she looked past me in a family photo. But now, she had nowhere to look but down at the words her grandson had written. She handed the book back to Caleb. Her voice came low and slow. "You made this all by yourself?" Caleb nodded. "I asked Dad to help with the ribbon, but the pictures and the drawings were all me." She looked at Marcus, then back at Caleb. "It's very special." She didn't say thank you. She didn't say she was sorry, but something in her voice cracked, just enough to show that something inside her had shifted. That small, careful change said more than an apology ever could. I stood up and walked to Caleb. I knelt slowly beside him, placed my hand on his shoulder and said, "That was the bravest thing I've ever seen you do." He turned and whispered, "I didn't like how they were talking about you." I wanted them to know the real story. I pulled him into my arms and held him close. My belly pressed between us, and he reached up and placed a small hand on it. "She's going to be okay, Mom," he said. "She has us." Those words hit harder than I expected, not just because they were beautiful, but because they were true. For so long, I had poured myself into keeping peace. I had bent myself in every direction to be accepted, to be included, to belong in a family that made me feel like a guest in my own life. But Caleb wasn't waiting to be accepted. He stood up and demanded respect in the most loving, direct way a child could. That wasn't just a gift to the baby. It was a gift to me. Then, to my surprise, Marcus stood up. He walked around the table and picked up the baby book from where Caleb had set it. He held it in both hands, flipping through the pages slowly, making sure everyone could see. When he reached the final page with the photo and the handwritten message, he paused. "This photo," he said, turning it toward the group, "is of Ava holding Caleb right after he was born. She did it on her own. No partner, no help. Just her and her baby." People shifted in their seats. Someone at the back of the yard coughed, embarrassed. Brielle took a long sip of her drink and avoided looking at me. Marcus continued, his voice stronger now. "That was the beginning of Caleb's life, and now she's doing it all over again. Except this time, she's not alone. We're a family. And this woman, the one some of you are so quick to mock or ignore, is the reason that family exists." Patricia lowered her eyes. Brielle raised her chin, trying to appear unaffected, but even she couldn't hold her usual smirk. "I think," Marcus said, "it's time we start treating her like the core of this family, because that's what she is." He walked over to me, wrapped an arm around my waist and pulled me in. I could barely hold my tears. The crowd was still. Some people looked away, unsure of what to do. Others nodded quietly, their smiles tentative but sincere. Caleb stood up and took my hand. "Can we go home now?" I nodded. We didn't stay for cake. We said quiet goodbyes. Some guests looked embarrassed, others grateful. Patricia placed her hand briefly on my arm as we passed. She didn't say anything more, but the gesture was soft, uncharacteristically so. As we stepped out of the yard and into the car, Caleb buckled himself in and said, "I think that went okay." Marcus laughed under his breath. "You were amazing, buddy." I turned to look at my son in the rearview mirror. He met my eyes and smiled, calm and steady. That was the moment everything changed. Not because someone apologized or begged for forgiveness, but because my son reminded me in front of everyone that my voice mattered, that I wasn't invisible, that I wasn't alone. He gave the baby her first gift, and he gave me my strength back. The car ride home was quiet. Caleb stared out the window, his hand resting on the baby book in his lap. Marcus kept one hand on the wheel and the other gently touching my knee, a small gesture that said more than words. I leaned my head back against the seat, letting the silence settle in. For the first time in a long while, I felt something different. Not relief, not peace, not even pride. What I felt was stillness. A calm certainty in my chest that I hadn't felt in years. At home, Caleb went straight to his room to change into his pajamas. I sat down on the couch and pulled off my shoes, wiggling my swollen feet and finally letting my body rest. Marcus walked in with a glass of water and sat beside me. "I should have said something sooner," he said quietly. I didn't respond right away. He wasn't looking for forgiveness. He was owning something, and that mattered more to me than any apology. "I know why you didn't," I said. "You didn't want to make things worse." "I didn't want them to hurt you more than they already had." I nodded. That was the truth. He wasn't blind, he was cautious. Too cautious, maybe. But now, the silence between us felt honest, not heavy. That mattered. Later that night, after Caleb had fallen asleep, I went to his room. He was curled up under his blanket, the baby book on his nightstand. I sat on the edge of his bed and brushed a strand of hair off his forehead. "You did something really important today," I said. He stirred slightly, but didn't open his eyes. "I didn't want them to laugh at you again," he murmured. "They laughed at me for a long time," I said, "but not today. Because of you." He smiled in his sleep, and I kissed his cheek. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat up in bed, one hand resting on my stomach, feeling the soft kicks of the baby moving. I thought about the day she would ask me about her big brother, about the kind of person he was. And I would tell her this story, not to make her sad or angry, but to show her what strength looks like when it's wrapped in kindness. Caleb didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue or call anyone out by name. He just told the truth, plainly and beautifully. And that truth changed the room. In the days that followed, I received a message from Patricia. It wasn't long, just a few lines. "Thank you for raising a boy with heart. That book reminded me of things I needed to see." It wasn't an apology, but it was something, a beginning. Brielle never mentioned the comment again, but she didn't make any more jokes either. At the next family dinner, she asked Caleb about his drawings. She even offered to help set the table. Small steps. Not transformation, but motion. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I had to shrink myself to be invited in. The baby came 4 weeks later, a healthy girl we named Elena Rose. When Patricia held her in the hospital room, she didn't comment on whose features she had. She just looked at her and said, "She's strong." I can tell already. Marcus looked at me and smiled, just like her mom. But I knew. She would be strong like her brother, too. The lesson I carry from that day is simple, but it sits deep in my bones. Sometimes, you don't have to raise your voice to be heard. Sometimes the quietest person in the room carries the loudest truth. And sometimes that truth doesn't come from the adults. It comes from the child who has watched long enough to know what's right. My son reminded me that silence doesn't always protect peace. And when someone stands up for love, for fairness, for dignity, they don't just shift the moment. They shift the future. The baby shower was supposed to be about welcoming our daughter, but it ended up being about something bigger. It became the moment we stopped accepting less than we deserved. They laughed at me, but my son made sure they remembered who I really am. Some moments change everything, not because they're loud or dramatic, but because they reveal the truth so clearly, no one can ignore it anymore. That day, I didn't fight back. I didn't need to. My son spoke with love, and it was louder than any insult could ever be. If this story touched you, made you think, or reminded you of your own strength or someone else's, please take a second to like the video, share it with someone who needs to hear that love can be louder than hate, and subscribe to the channel for more real stories about family, resilience, and finding your voice, even when the room is laughing. And don't forget to drop a comment below. I read every single one, and I'd love to hear your thoughts, your experiences, or even just a few words about what this story meant to you. Thank you for being here. See you in the next one.